Hello everybody and thank you for joining me. This is Sierra from Sierra T Designs, and today I have a card for you in my Christmas in July series. So let's jump right in. So to start, I am gonna use a piece of cardstock. You have to excuse my little cat there, she had to show up in this video. This is a piece of Neenah Desert Storm cardstock, and I have it already cut down to be an A2 size, and I'm just scoring it to make my card base. And I did go back and forth on whether or not I wanted to use a card panel or just the base for this, but in the end I did choose to use a panel, and then I'm going to trim it out with a stitched rectangle die just to add a little bit of pizzazz to the panel. And I have a Gemini machine, but I actually use Gemini Junior plates because I find it a lot easier to use in the space that I have. And I also have a magic mat because that's just fabulous. I've really been loving my magic mat. I think that it was a great addition to my craft room. So I just cut that out, and then I'm going to stamp directly on the panel. So I am using Simon Says Stamp Joyful Seasons stamp set for this, and I am going to heat emboss it with Alabaster embossing powder by Brutus Monroe. The only thing about this that I kind of wish I'd done differently is that I really like how white and Kraft go together. I love the colors together, but because it's a fairly detailed stamp, you don't get as much of the detail when you emboss it, at least not in this instance. Maybe if you had a finer powder, it would have worked better. But because the image is so detailed, I found that I didn't get as much of the detail as I would have liked with the embossing powder. And you're going to see that here once I kind of emboss it, that I do lose some of the detail, so it made it a little more difficult to color. Now, I like how the card turned out, but I do kind of wish that I'd maybe just stamped it down in some black ink or a different color of ink and seen where I could go from there, but I didn't, and this is what I did, so we're just going to keep going forward. So I did heat emboss this. I used my anti-static powder tool, and I'm going to heat set it with my heat tool here, and I am going to color it in and add some extra stuff with some pencil crayons, or colored pencils, depending on where you're from. But I did want to add a little more to the design, so I also brought in a second stamp set. It's like a mistletoe bushel, and the Merry Christmas Sentiment from the same stamp set, that same season's Joyful Seasons stamp set by Simon Says Stamp. And I'm just using my Misti to stamp that down. And again, a very detailed stamp, and you lose some of the detail because of the embossing powder. So if I do this like a design again with this stamp set, I think next time I will just stamp it down in a colored ink and then do it that way instead. But I like how this card turned out. I just wish that my image had a little more detail. That's all. So I am going to use some Prisma pencil crayons, Prisma colored pencils for this in a few different colors. I have grass green and dark green that I'm going to use for the leaves, and I use just a few colors here. I'm going to use white and a little tiny amount of lilac just to add a little bit to the little cotton parts of this stamp set, and then I have crimson red and Tuscan red that I'm going to use on all of the berries. And super simple coloring. I just lay down a wash of the light color, and then I bring in the dark color just to add a little shadow, and that's pretty much it. I'm only going to show you on a couple of the leaves and the berries and whatnot, just to give you an idea of what I've done here. It took a little bit to color, so I don't want to make you watch the same thing over and over, but I just kind of just added a little bit of dimension in the inside of the leaves and the berries as well. Added a little bit of a curve to it with the darker color. So if you guys are not familiar with my Christmas in July series, I did it last year as well. I'll have a link up in the top corner there. You can go and check out last year's videos if you want to check them out. And this is technically my second video for this month that is Christmas themed. However, the one that I posted, it would have been Saturday, so 2 days ago, from when this goes live, it's an almost Christmas card. It's Christmas card in that it is like snowflakes and like Christmas colors and whatnot, but the sentiment isn't Christmas, so I called it my almost Christmas card. So if you want to check that out, I can have that linked in the card as well. And it's a really pretty snowflake card that was a part of a holiday hop with some other creators. So go and check that out if you're interested. But yeah, so you can see here I'm bringing in the white very lightly to kind of color in that cotton. And off camera, I wanted to add a little bit of lilac into it as well, just to add a little more dimension. You're not going to see it just because I did it off camera, but when I hold it up at the end, hopefully you can see that there's just a touch of lilac in there. And I'm just lightly rubbing the embossing powder here to kind of try to get if any of the wax ended up outside of the images. And now I'm going to bring in an N1 Copic marker. It's neutral gray. And then I'm going to outline the image. This is only to add a little bit of dimension. So you're going to see once it dries back that it's not super noticeable. I'm going for a very subtle look, but I wanted to add a little more dimension to this so that it looked a little like it was standing up off of the paper, if that makes sense. So this is kind of a really neat way to add a bit of dimension without having to cut something out and lift it up with foam tape or anything like that. So this is just a really quick way to add some dimension to your images. And again, you could use a different color. You could bring in a really pale green or a really pale red or anything like that. I chose gray just because I have a tendency towards grays when I shade images. But there's no wrong way to do this. It's just a color that's going to add some depth to the image. And when you see it in the final images, it's going to be very subtle. But in person, I like it. It just adds a little bit extra. And then I did go in and color in all of the pieces that were between images, just to add a little more depth. And then because I can never leave anything alone, I had to bring in some perfect pearls that are just mixed up in my mini Misti bottle or mini Mister bottle there. And I just splashed those on. And I also brought in some white gouache just to add some kind of, like, not necessarily snowflakes, but a little whimsy, a little bit of splashes that kind of just, I feel like they add to a project. So I like to bring them in. I also have a piece of a red velvet trim here. This is by Tim Holtz. It's the Tim Holtz Christmas velvet trim. And I'm just going to adhere that down above the stitched rectangle line on the bottom there. And I just used some glue, some liquid glue to adhere it to the front. And then on the back, we're going to use some, I believe it was 1/4 inch score tape to hold down the tails in the back. And I just kind of press that down. I've been really loving the Beary Art glue, so I've been kind of using that for everything. I just really like how the precision tip is so easy to use with small images. And not that you needed it for this. You could have used a different liquid glue for that. I wanted to use liquid glue in the front just for a little bit of time to move it around if I needed to. And then for this, I'm going to use score tape in the back just for a really strong hold because I don't want the ribbon to let go. Now, granted, this panel is going to be adhered down to a base, so it would have a hard time just letting go, but I'm kind of careful about not wanting it to come apart. And I don't use ribbon very often in my stuff, but most of this stuff was actually from the Simon Says Stamp kit, the December 2020 kit. And because I am Canadian and I usually get my kits a bit late, I didn't get it in time to make cards with it for Christmas. So I usually save the kit until July. Sorry, I forgot what month it was for a second. I save it for July and then I use it to make my Christmas and July cards. And then I brought in a few Studio Katia, I believe these are the ice sparkle crystals. I am in love with these. They're so pretty. They just have subtle silver glitter in them. There's gold ones as well. I just haven't managed to get my hands on them yet because they're always sold out when I go look at the Studio Katia store, but I will get my hands on them eventually. And then I just brought in some glossy accents and put it all over the berries. And then I have to set this aside to dry. And you guys saw that I brought in some 3M foam tape just to lift my panel up and give it a little more dimension. And it did end up a little bit further to one side, but I just brought in my trimmer and just trimmed a little bit off of the one side and then it was centered. So, I mean, the card's going to be like a smidge smaller than an A2 sized card, but I don't think anybody would notice, honestly, and it's going to be easier to put in the envelope. So I wasn't really worried about it. And I have a Schoolhouse red envelope here with the same stamp set that I used on the card, and I'm just going to stamp that down on the envelope just to have something that's a little bit matching with the card. I don't generally do this, but the envelopes came in the kit, and I wanted to kind of create something that matched the card. So that is the first, or 1.5 card in the Christmas in July series for 2021. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I hope you'll stop by next week to see in the next video in the Christmas in July series. And I hope that you guys will consider subscribing, give me a like, leave me a comment if you have any questions or want to say anything to me. Thank you so much, guys, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye for now.